Hey everybody, and welcome back to Cast Album Chat with Tyler. Today's video is going to be a bit standard for what I used to do, kind of talking about all the recordings of a specific show. But this one's interesting because it's had a few different iterations in its lifetime, as in two different pieces that were put together to make one musical. Before I get into the video, I wanted to say big thanks to my friend Justin for recommending that I do a video about this show. It's a show that I have loved for many years. So we're gonna go back, since I was a little kid listening to this show, and we're going to talk about song and dance in a video that I like to call Song and or Dance.
You must be mistaken, it couldn't have been.
So I had to type up some notes on this one because I know I'm going to forget something. There's a lot of information about this show, and I'll probably get a little bit into the history of the show as it sort of informs the types of recordings that we get of it. If you will remember back to my video about the different types of cast recordings, this show kind of runs the gamut as far as concept albums or studio albums, live albums, studio albums of actual productions. So we'll just kind of do a little bit of time traveling here, because if you don't know, Song and Dance is a show that originally started in two different pieces, and then they were combined together to make one full evening of theater, and then later on in its life kind of became separated again. So I think it is only fitting to start from the very beginning. This piece started with, I would say in 1977, I think, with the creation of a piece called Variations. And this was Andrew Lloyd Webber's kind of first big non-musical theater piece, since he started composing for musical theater. And so how this came about is his brother, Julian Lloyd Webber, a famous cellist in his own right, won a bet against Andrew Lloyd Webber. I think it was like a soccer football match. Anyway, Andrew had to write a piece for cello for his brother. So he chose Paganini's 24th Caprice. I am not an expert on exactly what is like a variation piece. I know that there are many composers that have written variations on a theme of, but I did go back and listen to the original Caprice here. Really what it is, it's a whole kind of virtuosic piece written for, I believe, violin. And so there are different movements here, and the 24th movement is the one that was used for a jumping off point for Andrew Lloyd Webber. You can hear that in the structure of the very first piece, the kind of the first big song number movement, whatever you want to call it, in Variations. And it's called Variations 1 through 4. So if you go back and listen to the original Paganini piece, you will definitely know that this is what Andrew Lloyd Webber based this first melody on. So this gets us into the recordings here. Like I said, this piece was written in 1977. It premiered at the Sydmonton Festival, which is Andrew's kind of yearly festival to workshop his pieces. And it was for Julian Lloyd Webber on cello and a rock band called Coliseum 2, I believe, in my notes here. Yes. With a few additional players that joined them, mostly the woodwinds. And this is kind of what was recorded in 1978. I have to say that the cover for this album is maybe one of my favorite covers of any musical theater related pieces, especially in the Andrew Lloyd Webber canon. It's just a really cool cover that gives you an idea of what the piece is going to sound like. And it's the original album. Let me see, I've got all of my, goodness, I got them all out here. This is the one that I own. This is the remastered CD version from 2000. I'm sorry, no, not 2000, 1998. This was remastered and released in 1998, I believe. So if you have to get any version of this unless you're a big fan of vinyl. This remastered version sounds spectacular. It really is all instrumental. There are no vocalists on this album. It's just Julian Lloyd Webber plus the additional musicians that play through this whole piece. The cool thing about the piece is that there are individual movements. Like I said, variations 1 through 4 was kind of like the big breakout number from this musical piece. And it was used in a lot of different ways. I can't remember if it was maybe used for a football tournament as the theme song. I'll have to look into that a little bit. You can do your research there. I don't want to make this video too long. But the interesting thing is there was kind of a pop version of this that came out that is not on the original album, but you can find it on some other Andrew Lloyd Webber compilations. And it's really cool. Most of the number is the same as what you'll find on the original recording, but a little bit later on you get kind of an electronic keyboard something or another sound coming in. And you kind of hear echoes of pieces he's going to write in the future. Mainly, I think it's called, I don't think it's called The Graveyard. It's like On the Way to the Graveyard or To the Graveyard in the Phantom of the Opera movie. And that chord structure is there at the end of this number. And that chord structure actually is what ended up being Beneath the Moonless Sky in Love Never Dies decades later. So it's kind of cool to hear like how this some of this music sort of mutated into something else in the future. Also, Variation 5 is what became Unexpected Song from, it was originally introduced when the show became Song and Dance, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Unexpected Song. Variation 18 is from an earlier musical that Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote with Tim Rice that never really premiered, called The Likes of Us. So that number, I believe it's the title number from The Likes of Us. And also Variation 7 shows up a little bit later on in its entirety in School of Rock. It's kind of like a Guitar Hero. They're playing video games. And this number shows up again in its entirety, not changed exactly as it is on this album. Additionally, when I get into the original Broadway cast recording of Song and Dance, the Variation 20 is actually the overture for that show, which was not the case with previous productions of Song and Dance. So he got a lot of use out of variations, but this is where Song and Dance all started. 1978, recorded by Julian Lloyd Webber, Coliseum 2. If you can find this one, this is a fantastic release, especially if you can hear it remastered. The sound quality is spectacular. Later in 1986, the only other recording of Variations, just as Variations, came through the London Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Lorin Maazel. This is a symphonic version of the show. So the original version was just the cello and the rock band, and this is a fully orchestrated version. It is exactly the same, or almost exactly the same in structure as the original rock album, or I don't know if you want to call it a concept album because there really is no concept to it. But the structure is basically the same. The interesting thing about this recording is, as you might guess, sometimes it's very successful at times in fleshing out the sound. Specifically a little bit later on, I can't remember which variation it is, but it is using the full orchestra. The sound is gigantic and it's absolutely beautiful. While this is not, a substitute for the original album, I definitely recommend that you find this one. Additionally, at the very end of this, as kind of a bonus track, there is, from Andrew Lloyd Webber's father, William Lloyd Webber, he composed a piece called Aurora. And I just think it's fascinating to listen to on this album, because you hear, I've got this kind of in my notes about what it sort of reminded me of. You hear kind of shades of Sunset Boulevard in there. You hear that influence on his son. So you can kind of see his point of view and really where he gets that from. I hear a lot of Sunset Boulevard in there. I hear some of the melody of Unexpected Song in there as well. And really, when I listen to it, it almost plays out as a missing movement to Holst's Planets, The Planets. So if you do like Holst's The Planets, or if you're a fan of Andrew Lloyd Webber and want to hear what one of his biggest influences was, definitely check out this album, because not only do you get all of Variations in symphonic form, but also his father, William Lloyd Webber's Aurora. Now, moving on to the second piece, which later on ends up becoming the first piece, is Andrew Lloyd Webber's Tell Me on a Sunday. Quite different from Variations. This is a one-woman song cycle. So it originally starred Marty Webb, and she did, so Variations premiered at the Sydmonton Festival in 1977. I don't know what my hair is doing today. 1977, and then in 1978, I believe it was, Marty Webb premiered Tell Me on a Sunday. No, I apologize. 1978. I'm losing my mind. 1977 for Variations at the Sydmonton Festival, and then in 1979, I believe, is whenever Marty Webb premiered this at the Sydmonton Festival. Then going into 1980, she did a television special of the full show, and I believe that there's a remastered version that's on YouTube right now. It was never released commercially, and it's a separate recording than the original recording of Tell Me on a Sunday, but it was just recently rebroadcast on the BBC, where it originally premiered in 1980. But it's probably the best version you're going to find. So, put it on your playlist there, check it out. But this all brings us to what I like to call the original concept album of Tell Me on a Sunday. This is the CD version here. I bought it a couple of times, and I don't know what happened to my first copy. In this case, it's broken, obviously, but it's in great shape. Marty Webb is she was the creator of this role, and I think she'll always have her stamp on the role. She's very dry in this, and if you watch the television special, you can tell by her facial expressions. She's very straightforward with it, but there are some comedic songs, there's some really heartbreaking songs. Of course, as you might expect, Tell Me on a Sunday is the title song, which is not really in its entirety here on this album. There's a little kind of bridge part it's not even a bridge, it's just kind of like the climax of the song that was added in later versions. But in this one, you really kind of get the very, the baby form of Tell Me on a Sunday. In this one, I kind of like to call this a basic sketch. The character of the English girl is just the English girl. She has no name. And this is her story of moving from England to New York, and some of the romances in her life. So every few songs, 3 or 4 songs, is kind of a different man in her life, from the original guy that she's with, to a movie producer, to kind of a Midwestern guy, to a married man. And so she kind of goes through all of these men, and it's the story of what she goes through in her internal monologue. But in this version, there are a few numbers that we actually don't get until later down the road, when this piece becomes Song and Dance. Last Man in My Life is not on this recording, and neither is the song Married Man. But this one is kind of a classic. I do have it on vinyl, and it looks basically the same. There are really no pictures to speak of, except for this picture of Marty Webb spray painting the title there, just because there was no real physical production that was related to this album, just the TV special. And the design is kind of similar to what you'll see in kind of the credits there on the TV special, but it is a different audio take. So if you can find this one, it's not that hard to find. You can find it on Amazon or anywhere else you get your recordings. This is the original concept or studio album from 1980 of Tell Me on a Sunday. This is where I start to really have fun with Song and Dance / Tell Me on a Sunday recordings. I love a good international cast recording, and what's so interesting about this musical piece, this song cycle for woman's voice and orchestra or band, is that it was spawning international recordings before this was actually a stage show. So in 1980, I wish I'd taken these little stickers off here. Gitte Hennig, a Danish singer, actually released a German version of this album. So in the same year, I believe it was recorded in May of 1980, so right after Marty Webb recorded the English language version, she recorded basically the exact same. I don't think there are any additional songs or anything. I don't think that Tell Me on a Sunday, the song, has that climax on it yet. She recorded this version with a translation by Michael Kunze, and it sounds remarkably similar to the original English album. This one is a little bit harder to find. It came out through Global Records, and the CD, you can find this on vinyl pretty easily. CD, you can find it if you want to look for it. It pops up on eBay and Discogs quite a bit. But it is kind of expensive for what it is. It's a kind of a basic album that it seems was readily available for a very long amount of time. But I have to say that I enjoy this album a lot, and I probably listened to this one more than the original English album, just because I'm a weirdo. Gitte and Marty Webb have very different voices. Neither one of them is vibrato heavy. So they're very much kind of pop singers singing these numbers. Although both of them, of course, Marty Webb comes from the theater, so you know she is a theatrical actress. And then Gitte also has done quite a bit of, I want to say quite a bit of theater. She's a pop singer, a Schlager singer in Germany for the most part, even though she is Danish. She recorded quite a bit in Danish, and we'll get there in a second. But she has the biggest part of her career in Germany. So it's just kind of interesting hearing this Danish singer sing this version of the show of a German girl who moves to New York. So you get some interesting translations in there by Michael Kunze, and the cultural references are changed for a German audience. So really that's what this was, in releasing this in the German-speaking world, introducing the music to them and really making it digestible with those cultural references to the German audience. So this is the 1980 German recording of Tell Me on a Sunday, which is entitled Bleib noch bis zum Sonntag. Further down the rabbit hole, I only found out that these next recordings existed just a few years ago. I was kind of poking around on Discogs. And I found what I thought maybe was a Swedish version of Tell Me on a Sunday. Se det på en söndag. My Swedish is terrible. This is sung by Maria Wikman. And what's really interesting about this is that this has the same musical director as the German version. His name is Michael Thatcher. I believe it's up here on the front cover. Maybe, it's on the back cover, very big. Translation, Swedish translation by Ola Bergman. I was shocked to find that this existed. And really, this is the original German album. The backing tracks are the same, but you have a different singer here, obviously. Different translation. This is about a Swedish girl that moves to the United States. And I have to say, this, I was lucky enough to kind of get a little bit of time to listen to these recordings, just a little bit in passing. And this is probably the version of Tell Me on a Sunday that I listen to the most. I just really like Maria Wikman's voice. She hasn't really done a lot since, and I don't think she ever really did much theater at all, if she did any. But this is basically the German album with a Swedish singer. And like I said, this is not available online. I'm sorry, it's not streaming anywhere. You can find it online easily in vinyl form, yeah, this is basically the same thing. The only real difference as far as the orchestrations or backing tracks are concerned is that there are a few numbers, like the Letter Home to, in this version it's called Letter Home to Sweden, and the other versions it's Letter Home to England, Letter Home to Germany, and Letter Home to Sweden, the backing is only piano. And so luckily, because it really goes with the voice, there was a piano player that played specifically with Maria Wikman to do her versions of those songs. Otherwise, she uses the backing tracks from the 1980 version, as evidenced by listening to it and having the same music director, Michael Thatcher. So if you can find this one, it's probably available mostly on Discogs. Not terribly expensive, but well worth your money. the Swedish cast recording or studio recording of Tell Me on a Sunday. Going back to Gita, as I said, she did the German version of the show in 1980 is when she recorded it. The Swedish version came out in 1981. I don't know exactly when she recorded this version, the Danish version. I should have prepared you for this cover as well. I don't know what they were smoking, but this is probably the worst cover that I've ever seen for anything musical theater related. Maybe. Oh, I'm still thinking about that Cabaret album from Hungary. Anyway, this is awful. But the good thing is that the recording is fantastic. Once again, we have the same backing tracks. The only difference are those few letters home, in this case, letters home to Denmark, that are separate backing tracks. Otherwise, it's the same. What I will say about this version that makes me prefer this over the German version that she did is that this is her native language, and she has so much ease with it. Not that she trips over the German by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, she later went on to do theater. She played Norma Desmond in Germany a few times. So she just sounds more at ease here, and she actually sounds younger when she sings in Danish. So, I said that I really prefer the Maria Wickman version. It's kind of a toss-up between whether I like this one more or the Swedish version more. Again, it's just kind of the bare bones of the show, as there is no physical production that is related to this. This is all you get, and I have no idea what Gita spread eagle leaning up against a stucco wall in a grass field has to do with Tell Me on a Sunday. But there you have it. I'm going to try to pronounce this, and it's going to be terrible because Danish is very difficult. Side på en Zindag. Why not? So if you can find this one, it's on Discogs, most likely. You can find it in pretty good shape. I definitely recommend this album. This is the 1982 Danish version of Tell Me on a Sunday. And as if she couldn't get enough of this song cycle, Gita in 1984 toured with a band that I believe is called Lampenfieber. And she basically performed the majority of the song cycle, not the whole thing, but a good chunk of it with this band in 1984. This is a live recording. I don't have this on CD, but it was released by Global Records, both on CD and vinyl and tape, apparently, according to this back cover here. So if you want to hear an alternate take, this is just kind of live, smaller orchestration, obviously. But if you do want to hear it, I don't believe this is streaming anywhere, but you can find it on CD. Once again, much like the other, I've already spoken about one recording, the German concept album or studio album with Gita, what came out through Global Records. This was also Global Records. And for some reason, their CD releases are very expensive when you can find them. I don't think they were that rare in their time, and you can definitely find them online. Just be prepared to pay a little bit more for them if it's something that you want to have in your collection. So this is the 1984 live mini version of Tell Me on a Sunday by Gita and Lampenfieber. And to finish up our little section about Tell Me on a Sunday, this is the 2003 London cast recording. So we're kind of skipping over an amount of time that there was a show called Song and Dance. But they came back to just Tell Me on a Sunday, this one-woman song cycle. Turned it into a full evening for theater that they could charge people lots of money for and not make them feel shortchanged. So they added a few songs here. The original version had lyrics by Don Black. And in this version, it was Jackie Clune came in and wrote a ton of new lyrics for this show. It starred Denise Van Outen. And this version of the show, or some version of this version of the show, played the UK for years and years and years. This was the West End version. It toured quite a bit. It might have even gone back to the West End at some point. But I have to say, this is not it. You can skip this one, as far as I'm concerned. I don't like the way that it's recorded. It sounds like she's sitting on top of the microphone. Doesn't sound theatrical in any way, shape, or form. And there are a lot of new songs in this recording. Some of them use the original melodies. Others are brand new songs, if you want to call them songs. Haven in the Sky, am at a loss for words. It is. I don't even know what to say about it. It's not very much melody, and then you get kind of like the PA system on the airplane as she's coming over to New York. Speed dating, Tyler King, beautiful name for a song, terrible song in and of itself. So yeah, I mean, you can skip this one if you're interested in it. I'm sure that it's streaming somewhere. Find some information on it. I just don't want to spend too much time on it because this is one of my least favorite Andrew Lloyd Webber albums ever. So that's Tell Me on a Sunday, the 2003 London revival. And just to wrap up a little bit with Tell Me on a Sunday, Marti Webb came back in 2014 and did a few performances of the show as well. Obviously much older than she was when she originally did the show. But she, strangely enough, has grown with the piece. And she did a radio broadcast of that 2014 version. I think she did about 5 performances in 2014. I've got it written down here at the St. James Theater. And then kind of February, March-ish, she went back to the Duchess Theater and did this again. And I believe that she did that radio broadcast maybe from the first few nights. I'm not 100% sure, but it was in 2014. So if you can find that somewhere, it was a radio broadcast. Again, she sounds fantastic. I'd have to look at the track listing to see if some of the numbers that were later introduced into Song and Dance later made their way into this version, but I don't think so. I think it really is just kind of very much the original version of the show, which is probably the version that is most special to me. It really resonates with me in a way that, when I was younger, moved to a foreign country, had my craziness and didn't know what I was looking for and had my moments of happiness and despair, and I think having this version of the show that's I don't want to say it's broad, but it's not specific. It can really I think each person gets out of it what they see in it, so you see that through your own prism. So I think it's very it's an interesting piece that kind of morphs depending on who's watching it. And it's just this original version, I think, from the original English, German, Swedish, and Danish recordings is the one that I highly prefer of Tell Me on a Sunday, but everybody's different. One more little tiny thing to wrap up Tell Me on a Sunday, and then we'll go on to Song and Dance. But interestingly enough, this is a one-woman show, and there are no other characters. There are characters mentioned, but you never hear anyone else. Of course, all the men in her life. And then there is a song called Cat Teeth and Caesar Salad, where she is dating a film producer, and she calls his office. He never has time for her, so she speaks to the receptionist or secretary in the office. Actually, doesn't speak to the receptionist speaks to her, to the English girl or the Swedish girl or Danish girl or whatever. But she never really gets through. All of that is to say that on all of these recordings, there actually is another voice that is, part of the recording. Something that I just find strangely fascinating is in the original version, the original English album, Elaine Stritch is the receptionist, and I think that is freaking hilarious. And then later on in the other versions, in the German version, interestingly enough, I don't know if they all coincide, but between the German and the Danish version, the studio versions, they have kind of the same studio singers. Don't know if they just found people that happen to speak both German and Danish, but there is a singer, I believe her name is Lucy Neal, and she was one of the kind of background studio singers for Take That Look Off Your Face. They kind of echo what the lead singer is singing. And she, I believe, plays the receptionist on both the German album and the Danish album. I don't know exactly how a receptionist in LA would speak Danish or even German for that matter, but it's pretty interesting to hear this. So just want to add that little caveat in there. I know that later on, Cynthia Rubia in the Broadway version was a dancer in the song part, the variations part, which I'll talk about in a second. But she did the voice of the receptionist on the Broadway album. So there's your little tidbit for the day. Okay, this is the part of recording where I start to doubt myself. I think I'm stuttering a lot, so we'll see if I can make this video cohesive in a way when I finally edit it. but I wanted to make sure to get this done because this is kind of a beast of a subject matter that I want to put all together in one video. So moving right along, kind of moving back in time, the last recordings we talked about were the 2003 2003 West End cast recording of Tell Me on a Sunday and the 2014 radio broadcast with the original Marty Webb. So going back to 1982, Andrew Lloyd Webber decided that he wanted to have a full evening of theater. And he had these two pieces. He had Variations that he had written before in 1977. He had Tell Me on a Sunday that he had written in 1978. And he decided that he wanted to put these two together in one show. So they did. In 1982, Song and Dance premiered as a full musical, first act being Tell Me on a Sunday, which is the song. The second act was Variations, that was accompanied by a group of dancers, which was the dance, obviously. And so they pieced it together, and in 1982 at the Palace Theater, it opened, and then opening night was recorded live. So this is the original London cast recording of Song and Dance, which is in essence Tell Me on a Sunday and Variations together in one evening. What I had always thought is that they were kind of related in some way, and I don't think that structure came till the Broadway production. But you know, the first act is just the story of the English girl, basically the same. We do get some new songs in here, like I was talking about, Nothing Like You've Ever Known. You get that climax to the title number of Tell Me on a Sunday. And it's restructured a little bit. The other breakout song from the show, Take That Look Off Your Face, is kind of moved from the very beginning of where it was on the studio album and moved to the middle of the piece to serve a more dramatic role in the show. Well, anyway, this is the London cast recording from 1982. It's come out on everything you can think of. I'm sure it was even I don't know if it was on 8-track, but it was definitely on vinyl, tape, CD. This is the remastered version from the early 2000s. I think, well, I say early 2000s, it might be 2007 or something like that. Anyway, this is probably the best sound quality that you're going to find. There were a lot of Andrew Lloyd Webber's albums that were reissued like this. And so if you can find this one, not only because of the sound quality, but inside you get the full libretto for obviously just the first act. And then there are a few songs at the end of Act 2 that bring the English girl back to sing with the dancers. Very interesting. But you get the full libretto here, all of the lyrics. And then, of course, in this beautiful packaging, you get the slimline double CD case. So the first act, the first CD is Song, Tell Me on a Sunday. Second CD, which way does this flip? It's broken. Variations for Act 2. And so this is the version that I listen to quite a bit, actually, just because it is live. Marty Webb, again, sings the not title character, but the main character of the English girl in Act 1, Tell Me on a Sunday. And then the principal dancer for Act 2 was Wayne Sleep. You'll see him, pop up in musical theater later on. Most specifically, kind of what I'm thinking of is the 1987 or 1986 London revival of Cabaret. He played the MC. Phenomenal dancer. I'll talk about how you can see him dancing the piece a little bit later on, but I'll get there in a second. So if you can find this one, this is not too hard to find. This is the original London cast of Song and Dance. As Andrew Lloyd Webber was really the it composer of the 80s, of the time, his shows went all around the world. And there was an Australian production in 1983. I believe it premiered in Perth. I'm sorry, not Perth, Adelaide. I believe it premiered in Adelaide, but I'm not 100% sure. But that production starred Gay McFarlane, who you can hear on the Barnum cast recording, probably the best charity out there on a Barnum cast recording. So if you can find that one, definitely find it. But she did a little single, just the two songs, Take That Look Off Your Face and Last Man in My Life. Only came out on this little 45 RPM EP. She sings it fantastically. I just wish that I could hear it in better sound quality. You know, this is not in bad shape whatsoever, and you can find this floating around online. Definitely worth listening to. She's got a smoother voice, I would say, than Marty Webb, so it's a nice alternate. I just wish I could hear a little bit more of this production, not only from her, but also from the orchestra that played Act 2 Variations Dance. But at least we have something, and we know that this production existed. So this is the 1983 mini cast recording of Song and Dance. And on this one, I'll probably get my information a little bit garbled, but I'm sure there's somebody out there that was, you know, alive at this time that would have information on exactly what the timeline was. But the original London production of Song and Dance opened in 1982, closed in 1984. There were a few replacements for Marty Webb. I think it's really cool that Lulu did it. That is pretty awesome. I wish I could hear her sing some of the songs, but I don't know if she's ever recorded any of them. But Sarah Brightman ended up recording the show in an interesting way. I think what happened is it closed, and then a month later they remounted this. I don't know if it was for a limited run or if it was just for a television special, but Sarah Brightman, who was, I believe she was technically married to Andrew Lloyd Webber at this time, starred as the English Girl. And so this is when the famous song, Unexpected Song, joined the show. So I don't think that Marty Webb or Lulu ever sang the song in the show. I know that Marty Webb actually did a version way before even Tell Me on a Sunday with different lyrics. I know she sang that before, and that's released commercially. You can find it out there. But they did a television special, and this was in 1984. I call this the London replacement album. I don't really know what to call it exactly, because I don't really know if Sarah Brightman was actually a replacement in the original production, or if they just shut it down, reopened it for a short while so that they could film this for television. But it is the original production itself, just with Sarah Brightman adding the song Unexpected Song, which later comes back in Act 2, even though it was written, the melody was written before Tell Me on a Sunday, and therefore Song and Dance. This is where the time travel comes in. But if you like Sarah Brightman, this is definitely one to get. A lot of the keys are changed for her, and it kind of plays with what she could do with her voice. I think that, you know, Phantom of the Opera, Requiem, even the parts of Cats that she sang probably fit her voice a little bit better than this score. Although I do know people that prefer this version over the original London with Marty Webb. So you can try them both out. This is a little bit more difficult to find for some reason. I don't know why. I think that actually a lot of these remastered versions that came out, this is kind of from the same series, they only came out in England and Europe, so in the United States it was a little bit more difficult to find these, even whenever it was re-released. What is interesting is that original London album was already on CD by Polydor, I think, or Polygram, not sure which one. And this was only on vinyl for the very longest time, and people were trying to get the vinyl. This was early days of the internet, you know, and so people would try to find the vinyl just so they could hear it. So it was a big surprise whenever this was released on CD. Again, you get the full show on this. You get Sarah Brightman singing Tell Me on a Sunday, bit shorter overture. You get Take That Look Off Your Face again at the beginning of the show, so it's restructured just a little bit. And then in Act 2, of course, you get the full variations. Something I forgot to mention on the London recording is that Sebastian Converti was the principal cellist. I think it's kind of silly to talk about you know, how this was written for such a famous cello player, Julian Lloyd Webber, and then whenever it was produced in the theater, there wasn't a big fanfare over who was playing the cello. It was who was singing Act 1, who was dancing Act 2, but not really who was the cello player. It's not watered down for any of these versions. They play the full thing. It is virtuosic playing. So hats off to Sebastian Converti for the original London version. I don't believe he plays on this recording, but sadly, the musicians are not specifically credited on this version. I don't know why, and that's a little bit sad. So whoever the cello player is on this version of Variations, second act of Song and Dance, bravo to you. Again, you get the same thing. You get the same libretto, which is kind of basically the same thing as the other release. except for just maybe some alternate lyrics that they got in here that they wrote for Sarah Brightman. And then the slimline CD case here and the packaging. So if you can find this one, it's not that hard to find, but it's just ever so slightly more difficult to find than the original London cast. So this is the kind of TV special from 1984 that they filmed when they remounted this production with Sarah Brightman, also with Wayne Sleep dancing Act 2. And you know, good old Andrew Lloyd Webber was not going to rest until this show got to Broadway. And when it hit Broadway, it definitely did in a very, very altered form. This is the original Broadway cast recording of Song and Dance. What you will notice is that this is only one CD. So this is basically Tell Me on a Sunday. Interestingly enough, when it moved over, a lot of Don Black's material was excised, and then Richard Maltby Jr. Came in to write some new lyrics, which I have to admit are quite funny at times, very much more aimed at an American audience. The difference is that, you know, Bernadette Peters does play Emma. She has a name in this one, but she plays an English girl that comes to New York. The difference is the audience that's changed this time. You know, most of the people that were watching the Broadway version were Americans, and so you kind of have to approach it from a different point of view of what is it like to have a British person come to New York seen by an American audience. So there are a lot more specific plot points in this one. She's a hat designer. All of the men, all of them, I think, have names. The structure is quite a bit different in this one. Orchestrations are kind of similar in a way, but the overture, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the variations, basically unchanged. And then it goes into Take That Look Off Your Face, but with completely different lyrics about her arriving in the United States. I do have to say that the costume design for this red jacket, I think it says Nebraska on the back, gave birth to one of my favorite memes I've ever seen. I'll put it up here at some point. But this is probably the most 80s looking thing I've ever seen in my life. Her hair during this, I mean, it was just a mane of hair, as we were used to with Bernadette Peters during the 80s and probably the majority of the 90s as well. This packaging is really interesting. So it's a fold out, so it's not a regular. You get a lot of pictures of Bernadette Peters. Sadly, you get none of the dancers for Act 2. Actually, Act 2 is not really mentioned other, I think, than in possibly the liner notes here. But of course, this is called The Songs. So it's obvious that they just recorded this to have Bernadette Peters record her role that she won a Tony for. There were obviously many other versions of variations out there, and I don't think that the structure of that musical piece was changed for Broadway. So maybe that's why they never really wanted to record that and therefore release it. I don't know if it was ever recorded. It'd be really cool to know if it were recorded. But in this version, kind of to make it a bit more of a through line, with the men in her life, as I said, they all have names. In this one, I believe it's Joe, her boyfriend, the one that has the jacket from Nebraska, is the principal dancer in Act 2. I think it's Christopher D'Amboise. And so you get the story of only her on stage in Act 1, no other actors. She sings her role, Act 1. Then Act 2, you get to see the character of Joe, and you know it's Joe because he's wearing the jacket. And so it's kind of his story and his journey in Act 2. Then they meet again at the end of Act 2 and then tie it up with the final number, which sadly is not on this album. I don't know why they wouldn't. There's not even a track list on the back of it, so I can't see, but I don't believe, just the finale. So this is basically just Tell Me on a Sunday. You don't get the finale of Act 2. Luckily, we do get that little overture that is one of the variations, so you can kind of hear what it sounds like. John Mausery was the conductor, I believe, of this album. He was the music director or music supervisor. So obviously, it must have sounded great. I just wish we got a little bit more. But this is the original version that I heard. This was the easiest thing to find in rural Texas when I was growing up. So this is the first version of Song and Dance that I ever heard, and it's kind of, to me, very special. Even though I understand that Bernadette Peters was sick when she was recording this, you can hear that her voice is a little gravelly, but she has personality to spare. So definitely find this one. It's a nice alternative take to Song and Dance, which is really just Tell Me on a Sunday, original Broadway cast recording. And Song and Dance itself really was never kind of a breakout hit. Variations was kind of popular in its day. Tell Me on a Sunday has been popular since it premiered in 1980 on television, as you could tell by those productions that were coming out in the early 2000s into 20-teens, and even nowadays, they're really producing it all over the place. I know that the Madás Színház in Budapest had a version, De Nytida in Denmark, Copenhagen, they had their own version, so it really pops up in quite a few places because it's quite simple to produce. If you just have a band and a female singer with a lot of personality, then you can put on the show. Song and Dance, unfortunately, and I was speaking with Justin about this, about how it's kind of a crime that it's rarely produced. I believe there was an Israeli version, and I don't remember exactly what year that was. There was no recording of it. So really the last little spark of life, the last breath that I really ever heard of Song and Dance was from the German production. This opened in Munich, and I'll show you the vinyl first. This is the vinyl. It came out. This was the full show, so it's much like the London recordings. You get Act 1, Tell Me on a Sunday, in this case would be called Bleib noch bis zum Sonntag, and then variations. It's all in one sleeve, it's not like a gatefold or anything, but you get what looks very much like Bernadette Peters from the Broadway version, which is interesting. I'll tell you about that in a second. It looks like Bernadette Peters here, even though Angelika Milster sang the role in Munich. And then you get a kind of little drawing of a dancer on the back here. Wayne Sleep actually went over to Germany to do this version as well, so he is dancing the piece, although you would never know it from the recording. Interestingly enough, though, because this was all translated into German, once again by Michael Kunze, Wayne Sleep does sing the finale of the show with Angelika Milster in German, so props to you. I know it's difficult to sing in German, had to do it myself. So it's really cool that he's so multi-talented that he can do this virtuosic dancing in Act 2 and then come out and sing well in German. So this had two vinyls. I don't know. Yes, there's a kind of a fold out with some pictures of this production. You get Angelika Milster here, and then you get a lot of pictures of the dance part. You get the full, I don't know if those are the full lyrics or not. I don't think they are. Yeah, actually they might be the full lyrics in here. But I was interested to find that this existed because for the longest time, I didn't know that this was released on a double vinyl album. The only thing that I had ever seen online and that I just kind of luckily found in college, later had to sell and then rebuy it at a way higher price, was the CD version. Sadly, this CD version is only song. So Song and Dance, it says part 1, and part 2 never came out on CD. Luckily, I was able to send my vinyl off to a professional transfer service, and I do have it on my computer, and I get to listen to it. It's pretty standard as far as variations is concerned. I'm trying to remember the name of the cello player. It's somewhere on here. I'll put it at the bottom of the screen. I don't think I could pronounce it anyway. I believe it's a Romanian player that played the cello. Plays very, very well. What I will say, much like the Vienna version of Cats that also has Angelika Milster playing Grisabella, her husband, André Bauer, which is not the same André Bauer that is the actor that shows up on the Elisabeth recordings, different guy, although they both worked in Vienna, very confusing, was the music director for the original Viennese version of Cats and the Munich production of Song and Dance. It's all very competent, but for some reason it just feels a little bit underwhelmed to me, and I don't know if that's a common thread with the music director or if that's just kind of happenstance. Maybe it was the way that it was recorded. These are live recordings, so you do still get that spark of live performance, much like the original London cast recording, the Sarah Brightman recording. I think those are the only other live recordings, unless you want to count the Tell Me on a Sunday Gita mit Lampenfieber in concert. So, weird thing about this CD, even weirder than not releasing Act 2, even though it was definitely recorded and released on vinyl, is that it splits up the tracks, between, where she is. So the first song, Take that look off your face. Sorg dich bloß nicht zu sehr in German. Takes place in Munich in the winter. But then in the spring, she's in an apartment in New York. And then summer, she's in a swimming pool in Los Angeles with Sheldon Bloom. These tracks are not split up by songs. They're split up by these seasons and kind of scenes. So there are only 8 tracks on this, but it's basically the original London version of the show. It has the same structure, basically. I don't even know, I should have looked at this before I started this video. I don't even think that Unexpected Song is on this recording, very interestingly enough, because by this point it had already been very popular in the Sarah Brightman version. Bernadette Peters obviously sang this on Broadway, so it's interesting that they went all the way back to the original London version of the show with Marty Webb. Again, this is just German Girl, this is not Emma, she doesn't have a name. And so, yeah, this is kind of a callback to the original Gita version of the show. This version is to the Gita version as Marty Webb's original London cast is to her studio recording. I know that's confusing, but there you have it. So if you can find this one, this is the other one that came out on Global Records, and for some reason is very expensive when you can find it, but it is available quite frequently on Discogs or eBay. But what I would recommend that you do, if you could probably actually spend a little bit less money, find the record in really good shape, send it off to a service to have it transferred, and then just come up with your own cover. I definitely, when I had mine transferred, they made this cover for me of the song. I only actually had them transfer the song version. They made a little CD for me and everything, so it looks professionally produced, and I put it up with my other CDs here. So I have my 2 German song and dances here on CD, but the only one that was released on CD was Song, Tell Me on a Sunday. But if you want the full thing, go for the record, the double LP set of Song and Dance from Munich, live recording. I hope you've learned something new about Song and Dance today. I know some of you probably know the ins and outs of the show, its beginnings from Variations, moving into Tell Me on a Sunday, then later getting switched in order to having Tell Me on a Sunday, then Variations as Act 2, and then later becoming more successful as just Tell Me on a Sunday. So it has a very tortured past. Much like Andrew Lloyd Webber's Starlight Express, I don't think there are any 2 versions of the show that are the same, unless you want to count those 3 studio recordings, the German, Swedish, and Danish versions of Tell Me on a Sunday. It really is kind of a living, breathing piece that seems to be updated quite a bit. Mostly it's performed in the present, so you know that updating is needed so it doesn't seem dated. It is definitely a show, like I said, that I think is very special to me, just because it's one of the Andrew Lloyd Webber shows that I grew up with the original Broadway album with Bernadette Peters. Also having moved to a foreign country, meeting my husband there, so you know that's very special to me. And kind of bringing it back to the reason for this channel, talking about cast recordings. I know in an earlier video, you know, I said that, you know, if there are no cast recordings of a show, then that historical record is really not there. And we wouldn't know that much about it. Because Song and Dance as a whole is not performed very often, I would say that there are so many fans out there that have never had a chance to see this show, mostly because Act 2 is very hard to produce with that full orchestra, with the cello part, and then the dancing as well. You know, it's very, very intense dancing that you can see if you watch the London version with Sarah Brightman. That should be on YouTube. It was never commercially released on disc. It was on VHS, so find that if you want to. It's probably falling apart by now. All that is to say that it's not produced very often, and so this is one of those shows that really is represented very well by the number of cast recordings that it has. And we're lucky to have a few of those live albums so you can hear exactly what it sounded like in the theater, and then in the case of the Sarah Brightman video, exactly what it looked like in the theater as well. So I'm very, very grateful that there are so many recordings of this show, both in Tell Me on a Sunday and variation forms and as Song and Dance. So I just kind of wanted to bring that full circle. I knew I threw a lot of history of the show at you, but I think it's really interesting hearing the history of the show to figure out why it was recorded the way that it was, when it was recorded, and what production it was related to. So again, thank you for listening to me yammer on about this show, one which is very, very special to me. Again, if you enjoyed this, please comment below. Tell me if there's anything that I might have missed. I know that there are some singles out there from actors that have sung Act 1 that have released them later, and I would love to talk about those as well. Please like the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe and let me know what you would like to see. I've got a few videos that I'm cooking up right now, and I can't wait to get started on them. But again, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
You must be mistaken. It couldn't have been. You couldn't have seen. 1-2 Wochen lang bist du jetzt fort. Ich zähl bestimmt jede Stunde. Jag är som du är som jag. Och vi tycks passa varandra. Du är som jag är som du. Kombinationen är rätt. Vi formar oss hjälten. Han är vad folk vill kalla för en virkelig härlig fyr. Han skal snart til Kalifornien og vil have jeg rejser med ham. Tusind tak for brevet. Ich sterb nicht dran, dass ich ihn jetzt verliere. Keine Spur, ich meine es nur.
Fingers crossed, I hope I've made the right move. Always thought that New York. Last thing that you used to call me so that you woke up, you called me up.